Welcome to the deep dive. So you've asked us to tackle one of the biggest challenges for any leader today, which is how do you lead when you're actively losing? When the crisis isn't just out there, but it's, rattling you internally. We've pulled together a really fascinating stack of sources that, well, they blend modern crisis management with some ancient, almost counterintuitive spiritual ideas.
That's absolutely right. And our mission today is, it's pretty laser focused. We want to move beyond that purely secular model of resilience. You know the one.
The grit your teeth and power through model.
Exactly. Just power through. We're here to show you how these sources redefine resilience, not as some stiff, unbreakable personality trait, but as a discipline, a deeply anchored, flexible discipline.
And I think the place we have to start is with the myth of unbreakable strength that just permeates corporate culture. For decades, we've had this ideal of the oak tree leader, the executive who stands tall, never shows a flicker of doubt.
It's a really alluring image, but
Yeah.
it's dangerously fragile. The sources are absolutely clear on this.
It's a recipe for collapse.
A total recipe for collapse. That attempt at constant performance over, authenticity,
Yeah.
it just doesn't work. Leaders crack under pressure. They face doubt, they face fear, just like anyone else. And trying to hide that cracking, it forces them into this rigid, isolated position, and then inevitably burnout.
So if the goal isn't to be an unbreakable oak, what's the model? What is that foundational shift in how we even define resilience? Because we usually think of it as bouncing back, right? Elasticity.
Right, and that concept, elasticity, is actually part of the problem. It assumes you want to go back to who you were before the crisis. But true resilience suggests we need to be fundamentally changed by it, not just, unharmed by it. This is where this really powerful Greek term comes in, hypomonē.
I love that word.
It's often translated as steadfastness or endurance.
Yeah.
It combines hypo meaning under and moni meaning to remain. So resilience isn't about snapping back. It's the art of staying under the crushing weight,
Staying under it.
acknowledging the struggle, and just refusing to abandon your post while the pressure's on.
That distinction really dignifies the struggle. It gives you permission to say, this is incredibly hard, but still stay put. But if you're staying under all that pressure, how do you stop that from just becoming, I don't know, spiritual exhaustion? How do you build that without collapsing?
Because it's built with the trouble. It mirrors another concept, dokimion. It's a term for assaying metals, purifying gold under extreme heat.
You can't learn it in a seminar.
You can't buy it.
Yeah.
You can only build it through testing.
Okay.
So when you're in a crisis, the resilient question isn't, how do I get out of this as fast as possible? The deeper question is, what is this pressure trying to build in me?
That shift from mitigation to formation, that's huge. And the ultimate model the sources point to for this surrendered strength. It's not about being tough. It's about a willingness to bend.
Precisely. Jesus modeled this in Gethsemane. True strength wasn't refusing the cup. It was praying, not my will, but yours be done. True strength, the sources argue, flows from reliance, not self-reliance. It's the capacity to stay anchored when everything around you is just shifting violently.
Speaking of anchors, let's talk about that internal crisis, the identity trap. The sources call it role enmeshment.
Yes, role enmeshment. It's that common problem where high performers, they start to conflate who they are with...
Of what they do.
Exactly. I am the CEO, or I am the project lead who never fails. So when the role or the company inevitably hits a wall or fails, they experience a kind of ontological death. It feels like they cease to exist.
And that just paralyzes them. So how do you anchor yourself against that? Against that current that wants to rip your identity away when your performance drops?
Well, the anchor metaphor comes from Hebrews, where hope is an anchor for the soul. But the striking detail is that the anchor goes up, into the heavenly sanctuary, not down.
Wait, hang on. Anchoring up? That feels counterintuitive. I mean, in the real world, you want your anchor in solid ground, right? Down deep.
That's the critical distinction. If you anchor to the seabed, that's the volatile world of circumstances, of metrics, of public opinion.
You're anchoring to the chaos.
You're anchoring to the chaos itself. The seabed shifts, you get dragged. But when the sources say the anchor goes up, it means you're anchoring to a fixed, non-volatile reality that is outside the system you're trying to lead. Your worth is fixed somewhere else.
That makes perfect sense. So your identity is stable no matter what's happening to the vehicle you're driving. And key to that stability is emotional command, EQ. How does that play out in a crisis? That difference between suppression and, what was the other term? Metabolism.
The EQ is trainable.
Yeah.
And in a crisis, it's all about that choice, suppress or metabolize. Suppression, the I'm fine face, is the default for a lot of leaders. They bottle it all up,
Yeah.
which leads to, physical stuff like ulcers or relational fallout like passive aggression.
It's that classic strongman model. Never let them see you sweat.
Right. But metabolism, the alternative, treats emotion as data, crucial data. Instead of just reacting, you acknowledge it and channel its energy. For instance, say your big project just failed. You might feel intense anger. Instead of bottling it, you metabolize it. You say, okay, I am feeling angry because injustice happened. This anger is data. So how do I channel this energy into fixing the process, not attacking a person?
That moves the energy from internal destruction to an external solution. And that internal regulation, conquering the chaos inside, that sounds like it has to be the first step before anything else.
It is. And this brings us right to the strategic framework in the sources. They call it the Ziklag moment. David's crisis there gives us this perfect three-step sequence.
And just for context, David was at his absolute lowest. His camp was raided, family gone, and his own men were talking about stoning him. Totally abandoned.
It was. And he modeled the sequence first. Regulation. The text says, David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. That's the internal stabilization. He didn't try to solve the problem while his soul was in chaos.
He centered himself first.
Then second, inquiry. He called for the ephod to inquire of God shall I pursue. This is seeking that external fixed counsel. And then finally, third, action. Only then did he take strategic action based on that counsel. And it led to a total victory.
And the critical insight here for you, the listener, is that most of us, when a crisis hits, a client walks, a product recall, we skip steps 1 and 2.
Completely.
We jump straight to panic-induced, often destructive action.
Yeah, and if you don't regulate first, you can't possibly distinguish between the vehicle and the vision. The sources use the shipwreck of Paul in Acts 27. The situation was dire. The ship was sinking.
Yeah.
But Paul was explicit. The vehicle, the physical ship, would be lost. But the vision getting everyone to Rome, the mission that would continue.
That is a phenomenal strategic separator. A resilient leader knows their purpose can survive the loss of the current asset or strategy.
Exactly. A non-resilient leader thinks losing the ship means the mission is over. Think about a company that loses its biggest client. That's the vehicle. A resilient CEO grieves the loss, but immediately pivots back to the core purpose and starts looking for a new vehicle.
And Paul himself did this by turning his own constraint into a catalyst. The sources call it procopo advance.
When Paul was imprisoned, he could have seen his chains as mission failure. Instead, he treated house arrest as his new job, his constraint. It actually gave him a captive audience, the Praetorian Guard. These soldiers were literally chained to him. They couldn't leave. So his imprisonment advanced the gospel in a way his freedom never could have. You have to look at your current constraint, the tight budget, the bad PR, and ask, how is this my new leverage point?
Let's pivot back to the enemy of all this flexibility, which is rigidity. The sources say rigidity is really just a symptom of terror, an inability to tolerate uncertainty.
And you see the devastating fallout of this with King Saul. The pressure was immense, his troops were deserting, Samuel was late, Saul's anxiety just spiked. And his inability to wait, to tolerate that uncertainty, led him to rigidly force the burnt offering, something explicitly forbidden to him. His need for control in the chaos cost him everything.
That rigidity is the polar opposite of what the sources call holy realism. How do we tell the difference between toxic positivity and, real resilient faith?
I love the two captains in a hurricane analogy for this. Captain 1 is all toxic positivity. The hull is cracking, and he's on the deck yelling, "It is a beautiful sunny day. We just need to believe harder." He's delusional.
And dangerous.
And very dangerous.
Yeah.
But Captain 2, the resilient leader, practices holy realism. He looks at the brutal fact. The storm is severe. The hull is damaged. Half the rigging is gone. But he anchors to the fixed promise. We will not sink.
So faith doesn't deny the darkness. It just refuses to let the darkness have the last word. You have to embrace the brutal fact of the present.
While holding on to the fixed outcome of the future.
Exactly. And this realism has to extend to our physical selves, which is often the first thing leaders just throw overboard. The sources call this leadership Gnosticism.
That's a strong term. Why Gnosticism, for those who might not be familiar?
Well, historically, Gnosticism elevated the mind or spirit over the body. The physical world was seen as disposable. In leadership, that means we treat our bodies like rental cars. We just drive them until they break because we think the strategic work is all that matters. But you can't sustain anchored leadership from a collapsing physical platform. The Sabbath isn't an optional break, it's an operating instruction. It reminds you that you aren't indispensable.
And the best example of this is Elijah. After his huge burnout moment, God's prescription wasn't a lecture. It was rest, food, and sleep. The body had to be restored first.
Physical restoration first. That's God's prescription for burnout.
Let's talk about the human bond. The sources really challenge that strongman model with the idea of vulnerability. Why is vulnerability, which seems so counterintuitive, actually a leadership superpower? Because it creates authentic loyalty, not just compliant obedience. Think about Gethsemane again. Jesus took Peter, James, and John aside and just admitted it. My soul is overwhelmed. He invited them into his weakness. The model here is let them see you sweat so they know where to take their own sweat.
When a leader admits their limits, it's not weakness. It's an invitation for the team to step up, to use their gifts to fill that gap. It builds collaboration.
Precisely. And this leads right into how we handle the failures that are just inevitable in leadership.
Failure has to be tuition, not a tombstone.
That's it. The sources push for a blameless postmortem. When something fails, your team has to know you're analyzing what broke in the system, not who to blame. That allows for real learning without a culture of fear.
And the ultimate clinic in this is how Jesus restores Peter after his denial.
It's so powerful. Jesus doesn't just forgive Peter. He does trauma recovery. He recreates the scene of the denial, the charcoal fire, to rewrite the memory. See, resilience is defined by the refusal to let failure become your identity. Judas defined himself by his mistake and perished. Peter was restored and became the rock. You're not defined by the failure, but by the one who restores you from it.
This has been a really deep dive. These frameworks are thousands of years old, but they feel so urgently relevant right now. We've covered that true resilience is Hupomonē endurance under pressure, that emotional mastery is about metabolizing, not suppressing, that constraint can actually be leverage procope, and that vulnerability is strength.
And fundamentally, the quality of your leadership isn't measured in times of comfort. It's measured by the character that's forged in the turbulence of a crisis.
So here is our final provocative thought for you to carry forward, building on that crucial vehicle versus vision separation. The sources define resilience as the capacity to remain anchored even when your circumstances violently shift. So given this, what one leadership vehicle, maybe it's a specific project, a title, a financial outcome, what one vehicle are you holding so tightly that its potential loss is actually preventing you from seeing your deeper vision, your core purpose? What strategic decisions would you be free to make right now if you fully accepted that the vehicle might sink, but the mission must and will continue?